Hi everyone, welcome to episode 139 of Woolen Spinning. My name is Rachel and I can be found pretty much everywhere as well for pearls. Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to new viewers and welcome to returning viewers alike. Welcome to the patrons of the podcast and of the community. You guys are obviously what keeps the show on the air week after week after week, and I really appreciate your ongoing patronage. So welcome to everybody who's in the chat. I can see you guys are already filling up screen after screen, which is so wonderful. I just love that you guys are willing to spend some time with me and to be here. And yeah, I just am so excited to see you all. I'm just looking at the chat really quick, making sure that everything's working okay. So thank you so much. We have a giveaway running in the Ravelry group for the month of February. It is in answer to Amy's question. She had messaged me on Patreon with this really great question, and she was wondering, what is the item that you have made that you love to wear the most and why? So we will answer that question. So you guys have been answering that question in the episode thread, in the February episode thread, which is linked in the show notes at patreon.com/wellforpearls or at wellforpearls.com, whichever website you like to use best. And so you can link to that and you can enter to win the 4-ounce right there, pin drafted roving of Shetland from Disdarrow Ranch, which is located in Tappan, BC, and she is a no-kill farm. So I'll talk about a little bit more about that in just a minute, because people have been going in there and rather than just saying what their favorite thing is that they've made and what they wear the most, they've actually been posting photos. So you guys are amazing. So thank you so much for doing that. So we will I will share one of those sort of over the next few weeks to feature some of the stuff that you guys have been sharing. I'm not quite ready to draw the prizes, but I will be sharing each week for the next couple of weeks some of the projects that you guys have shared. For the attentive spinners in the attentive spinner tier on Patreon, please have a look at the doodle and sign up to be a part of Woolen Spinning Radio. I have updated the calendar and it is ready and sitting there for you guys to put in when you're free and when you would like to record. So for the attentive spinners in the group, please head on over there. The links are in the show notes to sign up on Doodle. We have a new thing that just launched this past weekend. I had a very brief couple of minutes, and when I say brief, they were brief minutes. We have been sort of working behind the scenes, Mike and I, to really try to figure out how to offer a virtual spinning group. And thank you to those who were there yesterday and who were already able to participate. It was wonderful having quite a long conversation with Rosemary in particular. And so thank you so much for spending that time. But you guys have been, I know there's a lot of people in the community who are quite isolated for many different reasons, geographically, physically, etc., and don't have access to a guild or a stitch and bitch or a knitting group or anything like that. And there has been this constant call from the community right from the beginning to create these sort of virtual spinning groups for you guys to come with your questions and projects and your sort of agenda, if you will, to share and to learn more and to have access to me, but also to the bigger community. So I have launched that. It is on Patreon. You can join anytime. We will have 3 per month. If the times don't work, because I just posted times that sort of worked for me initially, if the times don't work, please message me and tell me what would work for you, because I am more than willing to move things around and I am more than willing to try other times. And the tier that you were looking for is spinning group, and we will be doing these through Zoom meetings as well. There is limited space to start with because I'm not sure what the capacity will be and how many will be too many. So it is very limited space. And so if it's something that you would like to give it a try, maybe try it for a month, try it for a couple months, see what you think, please hop on over to the spinning group tier. Very exciting, very exciting. And thank you to Mike, our IT support, i.e. my husband, for helping us to get that up and running, because it was a dream of mine, but it was also something that you guys from the community have been asking for and asking for and asking for. All right. So, I know for many people it's the evening where you are. So a lot of you are enjoying some quiet time just after dinner in the UK. Couch, hot water bottle, blanket, PJs, and knitting. That's wonderful. Let's, without further ado, let's just get into the show. So I was just reading in the chat, Diane was saying that she just had to leave for a second to throw 2 more logs on the fire. And it's funny because Mike and I were actually just talking this weekend. We have a very old gas fireplace in our family room. And our family room's not very big, but it is underneath 2 bedrooms and the kids' bedrooms. And we were actually saying to each other, because it is so old, and we did have it serviced last year, the guy said, he said, you probably want to think about replacing this sort of in the next 5 to 10 years. And Mike and I have been thinking very seriously about getting it reversed and put back to a wood burning fireplace, because almost immediately it was switched over. So the fireplace is over 25, almost 30 years old. And of course, there's a lot of new technology out there for gas fireplaces, but we also would really like to put in a wood burning fireplace. So, all right. Oh, you're cleaning chickpeas. That's awesome, Rebecca, a girl of my own heart. She says she's cleaning chickpeas. That's wonderful. Jill, if the times for the spinning group and the times that you can join are very different, please message me like I just said, because I need to know what times work. I know that I'm offering a lot of stuff during business hours, sort of during the day, because that's when the kids are at school. But I am not opposed at all to doing one at 6 in the morning, if that's what works overseas. I know you're local, Jill, or even in the evening once a week, if that's what works. So please reach out and let me know. I can't read your minds, and I really appreciate the help in kind of figuring out what times work. We had played around with putting the live stream in the mornings at, I think we tried 7 a.m. a couple of times, but it was funny. The chat was actually half of what it is today at 11 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. So I think we just need to find that sweet spot. So Jill, please let me know. Let me know. It's funny, Diane, you said you heat your 2-story house from the basement with your wood burning fireplace. That's actually what we were thinking, because my in-laws do, they have a wood burning stove and fireplace. And it's one of the ones that is to heat the house. And it's actually amazing how little wood they go through. And they live on a 30-acre farm, and so they actually use wood from their property. And it's been really interesting for them to look at sort of their gas bills in Ontario versus how much wood they burn and how efficient these new furnaces are for heating their house. And they have a 5,000 square foot house. So yeah, it's really interesting. It sounds like yours is so yours is an actual furnace, and that, same with theirs. Theirs is an actual furnace, and it's just incredible. So very cool. All right, so let's talk about Shell's project, because she shared in the February episode thread, and I said that we would go to that immediately. So this was from Shell K. Jones, and I think her first name is probably Michelle, but actually, Michelle, you don't have that on your Ravelry profile. So she shared this in the February episode thread, and what I'm going to do is just work through that thread. We'll just kind of we'll go through the post. This was post number 2. Next week we'll share post number 3. What items you have made that you wear the most and why. So this is what Shell said. In response to Amy's question, I'm still a new knitter. She started in December of 2018, but out of the items I have made, my most favorite FO, so FO for those who don't know is finished object, is my most worn, and not just because it's new. The Shift Cowl by Andrea Mowry is an excellent pattern. I'm really enjoying it. I'm really enjoying finding what items work best for my wardrobe. And while I want to make all of the things, and she emphasized that, some items are not practical. Experienced that and have all sort of had difficulties with that. Cowls, however, are very useful for me, and I can throw a cowl on over for warmth but not have to worry about it being fiddly or falling off. That's actually why, so when I wear my triangular shawls, and it's why I make so many triangular shawls, I knot them underneath to create a cowl-like item, and I find that I wear them more because otherwise they're too fiddly. I want to continue to make things that I not only love, but also become staples in my wardrobe. Definitely more shift cowls in different weights and colors. That's awesome, Shell. So next week we'll do post number 3 and so on down the list. But in March, I will draw the giveaway and send that 4 ounces of Shetland out. I haven't, Trin, I still haven't mailed that bat. It's just been a little bit crazy around here. So I am very sorry about that. It will go out to you. You will get it, I promise. So let's talk about breeding color studies, because it's been quite a few weeks since we've done breeding color studies. And I wanted to make sure that we talked about some breeding color study. I noticed, Florence, my audio is cutting in and out. Can you guys let me know? Because I think over here, I can't do anything about the connection, because everything over here is okay. Let me just check my cable at the back of the computer, just to make sure the cable isn't like slightly in, slightly out. No, it's okay. So let me know. All right, seems okay for you now, Kelly. Oh, hi, Bridget. Yeah, that's weird, you guys. Everything is working. I would also, you guys, if you're having a faulty connection, please don't hesitate to refresh, because the link is active for the whole time that we're live streaming. So do refresh. Okay, so breeding color studies. So I shared what I am doing with my breeding color studies in a sort of short vlog that is available on YouTube. It's linked down below, and that is sort of how I directed my How I Spin content for January, February, and then the last one will be in March. It's really weird. Are you guys finding this? I'm finding this. Can you just say that you are too, so I don't feel weird? I feel like because March is so busy because of Fibers West teaching. I'm lecturing at Fibers West as well as teaching. Rebecca's coming, which I'm so excited about, because we're going to live stream together, even though I don't know if she knows that. So she'll be here for episode like 143 or something like that. But in my mind, I feel like we're going to go February, April. So, and I think it's just because March is so stacked that I know that nothing's going to get done. So I've been trying to work on some content for April, and I've just been like, oh, so March doesn't really exist. But it's because everything for March is already queued up and ready for you guys. So it's been like this real mind thing. Anyhow, these are from our community members, Tamara, Becca, and Maggie. So thank you to the 3 of you so much for contributing your projects and for sharing with us. So Tamar, who's second Zephyr on Ravelry, but on Slack she is, I think she's just Zephyr. I'm trying to remember. Yeah, Zephyr. So Tamar is every time I click on anything, I like mess up my screens. I need a third screen. Tamar says, these are her finished skeins up right now. So this is my finished spin for our Breeden color study. The graffiti interrupted braid, which is on the left, was spun from the fold and chain plied. The braid was split into 4 lengthwise, and initially my vision for the skein was some heathering with short pops of bright color repeats, but the final product did not meet expectations. The heathering is too severe for my taste and muddying the skein into a chaotic mess. We are our own worst critics, hey? Because as soon as I saw these skeins, she'd posted them on Slack first before Ravelry. I just immediately was like, oh my goodness, I love those. So these ones are Becca's right now, but Tamara's will come up next. And I just think they're both absolutely beautiful. The skein on the right was spun across the top and chain plied with the braid split in 3 nests lengthwise. All in all, I see this as a win. I practiced spinning across the top with consistency, and I learned a few things about color management. Beautiful, Tamar. So Becca says, post number 113, after months of trying to finish off other stuff and having very little inspiration as to how to spin the study fiber, I finally got to it. I only got half braids, so it went fairly quickly once I actually sat down at the wheel. For the standard colorway, I went pretty standard myself with a traditional 3-ply with one variation. I decided to flip one of the 3 strips of fiber and switch the colorway order. I got the idea from Jillian Moreno's recent sample along, and I'm really pleased with the results. It makes for a lot of mixing, but not overly, so if you see what I mean. This skein is quite lively too, but not too visually busy. I think the effect is absolutely beautiful. And one of the things that I really like about flipping one of your strips, so that's this skein here, so you can see the amount of barber pulling that's in there, but the really cool thing about that is you almost sort of mimic a fractal kind of without actually having to go through all of the stripping of making a fractal. You can also do it when you do crepe yarn, which I did with my Lava Love yarn for the School of Sweet Georgia and for our How I Spin content on woolen spinning, and I did talk about it on the show. And it's a very effective way to get a little bit of color combining. You still get the striping, but you've got that little bit of confetti that comes across in the knitted fabric, and it's very effective. For the space dyed version, so that's Graffiti Interrupted, which is going to be the next slide that comes up here. I totally copied I can't say Kelly's Ravelry name, but it's Kelly, and did a 4-ply cable. I hadn't done a cabled yarn on the wheel yet, and I like the confetti look with a randomly dyed braid like this. I found many things to work on for the future. When trying a new technique on the wheel, I don't spin such fine singles. It made it harder to see what my twist was doing, and the cable construction is going to result in a firmer, denser yarn. So choose fibers like Polworth that can handle the twist and not get overly hard to the hand. Really good advice, Becca. Multiple steps of plying like this are not as forgiving of variation and twist, so keep consistent as much as possible. This is certainly a yarn I will make again. And her results speak for themselves. It's just absolutely beautiful yarn. That's it here. And you can see those beautiful areas of the yarn where she gets that gorgeous chain link. Really effective. Maggie, Nesting Meg, post number 120, says she finished her cowl that she was working on with her yarn from Graffiti Interrupted. She's so happy with it, and she's posted the details for the spinning on her project page, and she's pretty sure she posted it here in the group, which you did because I read it out on the podcast. She will knit up the graffiti yarn and is hoping to cast on a project soon. So thank you so much, you guys, for sharing. That's just fantastic. I love this cowl. It's funny because I've had this in my favorites, that cowl, for probably, I don't know, a couple of years. And every so often I go to it and I look at it and I sort of think, oh yeah, I should do that. And Hedgehog Fibers, Beatka, she had designed a chevron style sort of stole blanket shawl. Like it's this really big oversized item, which that sort of tends to be her style. And when I had seen that, she actually used specific colors from her hand-dyed yarns, from her, I think it was sock yarn, if my memory serves. Anyways, it was like specific colors, and the idea was to use up odds and ends. And she had like specific lengths of stripes that would sort of work up into this really but I can't see myself knitting something that big and that sort of over the top. But what I really like about this is with the hand spun, you create that look without actually having to break yarn, like because it's one continuous skein, and Maggie got that beautiful striping there, and you see all the color and all the movement which looks intentional, and it looks like multiple different yarns, but she just cast on, knit, and did a 3 needle bind off. So it's just fantastic. And if you look, I think she had made a note of this in I think she made a note of this in the Slack channel. She got, it worked out perfectly that her 3-needle bind off happened right in a section where the colors matched up. You can see it right there in the middle. There's that little bump. That's her 3-needle bind off, and the colors matched up perfectly. So like, that's incredible. That's amazing. So really well done, all of you. Yeah, I think it's a YouTube issue because everything at my end is fine. So maybe refresh your feed if I'm cutting in and out a little bit. So, tomato. Oh, it's a nautical word for tomato. Oh, that's hilarious. So tomato. That's how you say Kelly's username. I knew it was something like that, but I wasn't totally sure. Okay, let's switch gears. We're going to talk about my finished yarn. So let me move my project bag out of the way for just a minute because we'll talk about what's in there in just a second. So these are my Sweet Georgia yarns, and they do. So Diane was saying the chevrons sort of add an element without being chaotic, and I totally agree because the thing is that as soon as I'm going to be developing some content for the How I Spin stuff coming up in April. Around substituting hand spun yarn in knitting patterns and how we can approach our yarn substitutions, because one of the things that I've noticed again and again and again in my the more that I work with hand spun yarn and the more that I utilize it, and the more that like I look on Ravelry and I look at other projects that people have done, when we're working with really highly textured yarns, if there's a lot of barber poling, and I'm pointing at this skein here because it's just a really great example, and the color seems to be off on my webcam today, so I will post photos of these yarns afterwards because this is way more this color. But a yarn like this is really super interesting and it's really beautiful, and in and of itself for many people this is the finished yarn, right? Like this is it. This is the finished project, and this becomes sort of the self-contained project, spinning to make yarn. And I think part of that is because the idea of sort of looking at knitting patterns of thousands and thousands of pages on Ravelry of patterns that are popular, that patterns that people have made, it just becomes this overwhelming sort of, what do I do with my yarn? Because a lot of patterns that knitwear designers are putting out there and publishing feature stitch patterns and designs, whether it's cables or a lace pattern or a cable and lace pattern or some variation on like garter or rib or whatever. It doesn't kind of matter, but any stitch pattern is going to compete with the yarn. So if your yarn is what you're trying to feature, and this is supposed to be sort of the centerpiece of the project, if you will, it becomes very challenging to then superimpose something like cables over top, because both will get lost because they're competing for your visual attention. And from a design perspective, it just doesn't work. And it's funny because before we got onto the live stream, I was actually working on the presentation for Fibers West, and the presentation is on the book. It's on Breeden, the book that Katrina and I wrote. I've talked about it on the podcast before, but it's this book. And, I was going through it, and I haven't really gone through it like page by page since about a month or two after we had finished writing it and after we had gotten the final product. And by then we were shipping them out and talking about them on the podcast and so on and so forth. And it's been really interesting to go back and look at the patterns that we designed for those yarns, because the whole reason for designing those specific patterns for the yarns that we made in the book, to feature them, to show people how to use these yarns that they were making, the sort of what I kept noticing was the fact, as I was flipping through, was the fact that the patterns are so simple. All of the patterns that we included in the book don't have a lot of texture. They don't compete with the yarns. They feature the yarns, which is why it's such an interesting way of designing for hand spun, that's on dyed fiber, versus looking at a pattern that knitwear designers published that is on a commercial yarn that's a solid, that's one color. Even if there's like a little bit of tonal texture, like some of the Malabrigo yarns, for example, or some of the indie dyed yarns where there's layers of dye on top, they do generally still tend to be quite homogeneous, more so than you're going to get from a yarn like this. Like this just is not like a tonal yarn from, like, say, Malabrigo or Madeline Tosh or a lot of Katrina's yarns. There's layers and layers and layers of dye on there, but the overall feeling of the yarn is green, or the overall feeling of the yarn is blue. This is many colors, even if you maybe would describe it as being autumnal, because the colors are very, very well, it's called falling leaves. Like, it looks like the fall. So, yeah. Oh, good idea, Diane. See if it autocorrects. Oh, actually. The problem is with the webcams. So Mike and I have been talking a lot about webcam, about the camera setup and whatnot. The problem with the webcam is I have to go in manually and fix it. And I can't do that while the live stream software is running. So I didn't realize that it had auto set to what it's doing right now. Otherwise, I could have fixed it. See, it goes really dark. Anyhow, you guys know I can hold them up here. We can even switch the cameras if you prefer. I do, Mike and I are looking very, very seriously about changing some of the camera setup and whatnot. So, with Canon bringing out some of their new bringing out a new camera for the Olympics, they've announced the release and everything. We're hoping that maybe there will be some locally that are secondhand. Every time there's a new release of Canon camera, like, because I'm Canon, as soon as there's like a release, there's usually a flood in our local market. We've got 3 camera stores locally that all deal secondhand cameras, and there's always an influx of secondhand cameras that come in, and so Mike's been keeping his eye out. Yeah, it's a struggle with hand spun. So Bridget says, we love complicated patterns in weaving and knitting, but the simpler the pattern, the better to show off the yarn. It's so true. And so much of what I'm focused on in my making and in what I do is to show the hand spun, hashtag use your hand spun, right? So a lot of the patterns that I choose are to enhance and feature hand spun. So I do tend to stick with simpler patterns, even though I'm a very advanced knitter. So let's talk about these yarns, because these are my Sweet Georgia yarns. I'm going to move them out of the way for just a sec so that I can show you my control cards. And I am going to leave it on this camera for just a minute because it's easier to see rather than me holding it up on the big camera like this. And I know that you guys can appreciate that the colors aren't quite accurate, but right now we're looking at the actual yarn. So it doesn't really matter for just the second. So these were my singles that I spun. So if you guys remember, this was the Falling Leaves colorway from Sweet Georgia. And one of the yarns was 100% Gotland, which is actually this one in the middle here. And you can tell because it's so fuzzy. And then there was the Superwash Targi yarn, which is at the bottom here. And this was the Alpaca Merino Silk, which I thought I was going to have a big reaction to. And I was really worried about allergies because I am very sensitive to alpaca, and it's one of the reasons why I don't work with it very often. And it's because as soon as I start spinning alpaca, I get really congested and very sort of symptoms of like hay fever. And as soon as I stop working with it, I'm fine. So if it's like around in the environment, I'm okay. But as soon as I start working with it and it gets on my hands and kind of gets into my nose and stuff, I start to have a reaction. So I thought for sure that I would have a reaction to this and was a bit worried. And that's actually why I chose it to spin first. I was totally fine. And I think it's maybe because it's combined with the merino and silk. So it was a 50, 30, 20. 20% silk. So I think maybe that just lesser amount and not having that like pure alpaca, because I've got some baby alpaca in my stash to spin. That's an alpaca silk blend that I got in the Yukon. And I've been kind of putting off spinning it because I'm really nervous about whether or not I'm going to have a reaction to it. So, and the colors are beautiful. I really want to spin it. But maybe after the experience with this yarn, maybe I'll give it a try. And it is getting nicer outside. It's a beautiful sunny day today. It's too cold to sit out there and actually spin, but we are kind of getting to that point where I can spin on the front balcony again while the kids play outside. And I thought maybe I would spin it outside, and that might just kind of minimize the reaction. So, because once it's spun and knit, it's fine. It's just that initial, because the shawl behind me is alpaca wool, and I can wear it no problem, and I have no reaction. So maybe it was just some alpaca that I spun that I had a reaction to. Like maybe I don't actually have a sensitivity, or maybe I've gotten over it. I don't know. So I am not an allergist. So the differences between these yarns is actually quite amazing. The merino silk alpaca, or the alpaca merino silk spun quite, it's funny. So I've kind of ended up thinking of these yarns as like, on the scale of like fuzziness to non-fuzziness, the Gotland obviously was the most fuzzy and has the most halo. And if I hold this up a little bit closer, you can see the halo on those singles in the middle. But I was actually really surprised at the halo of the alpaca merino silk. It's quite fuzzy as well. Not as fuzzy as the Gotland, but that alpaca definitely poked through and created a little bit of a halo. And then of course the Targhee, there's like almost nothing. So the Targhee spun up very smooth, very fine. It was really easy to, all of them were really easy to draft actually. And they all sort of took on their, like what I would expect them to look like in the finished yarn, in the finished singles was very much how they appeared. I was spinning the alpaca merino silk. Because there's no scales on the alpaca or the silk, and I wasn't sure if the merino was superwash or not. It doesn't actually say on the label. And the way that it felt, it didn't feel super washy. I did use quite a lot of twist, and I spun that on my Magicraft Susie. And then the Gotland, I kept my twist quite low, and I spun it 15-1. Now, you guys have to remember, because to some of you who are newer spinners out there, you're probably thinking like, what do you mean 15-1 is low? That's like really high. I treadle very slowly. I treadle to the point where my wheel is barely... I treadle just fast enough to keep my wheel moving. There's a lot of people who learn how to spin and how to treadle, or when they're first learning how to spin, they get into this habit, and it's not good, it's not bad, it's just neutral. It just is what it is, where they tend to treadle quite quickly. So if you're drafting forward at a ratio of 10-1, let's just keep numbers super round. If you're on a ratio of 10-1 on your wheel and you're drafting forward, but you're treadling quickly enough that your flyer turns twice for that draft, you're actually putting in 20 twists. You're actually rotating that 20-1. So because I treadle so slowly, for every time that I draft forward, my flyer doesn't necessarily go all the way around more than one time. And because my hands move very quickly, I have to compensate for my hands moving quickly and my feet moving slowly. So that's one of the advantages to doing an exercise where if you take a length of string and you measure out, say, 12 inches or 20 inches, whatever works for you. I like to use the length of 30 centimeters on a metric ruler. So I'll take the length of a ruler like this, and I'll lay the string on it, and I'll tie a knot at 30 centimeters, which is roughly 12 inches, and I will tape the other end of the string to the orifice of my wheel where my wheel can still like turn, and I'm not hindering the action of any of that. But I know that from my orifice, that's sort of 0. And then what you can do is to figure out how many times it takes you to draft back and how many times you're treadling in that 12 inches. And you can sort of start to figure out, if you're treadling at 15-1, what is that in real time? How many twists are you actually putting in your yarn? And do you need to go up or down? And it doesn't have to be absolutely bang on. Like if you're treadling 15-1, and for every time that your drive wheel goes around 1 revolution, you're drafting forward, then you're putting 15 twists into your yarn. But most people aren't spinning that way. Most people are sort of putting in you're drafting back 6 or 7 times, you're treadling, maybe 4 times, or maybe you're treadling like 7 or 8 times. So you can kind of start to figure out how much twist you're putting into your yarns. And without getting too technical, you can sort of start to figure out, like, do you tend to spin high twist singles and high twist ply, or do you tend to err on the side of more low twist singles, low twist ply? So, and then you start to figure out why you feel like, say on that ratio of 8-1, your yarns are underspun, and why they're like light and lofty and airy. And maybe it's because you actually aren't treadling as fast as you think that you are, or you're making yarns that are really high twist and dense and heavy. Maybe you're actually putting in a lot more twist than you thought you were because you're treadling so fast. Does that make sense? No way. So Kelly says it's the one fiber she actually wears an N95 mask if she's processing it from raw. That's so interesting. Yeah. Yeah, it may have to do with how the alpaca is processed. You're right, Suzanne. They're very dusty and dirty. So maybe it was like where it came from. Maybe it wasn't as maybe the alpaca wasn't as clean as it was. It was a couple of different alpaca samples. Like it was a couple of different alpaca things, but they were all from trying to remember. It wasn't like commercially comb top kind of stuff. It was like from like farms that I'd gotten locally. I'm trying to remember, because I did have a reaction to the Kramer Yarns stuff, but then I was fine spinning it outside. So that's just what I did, because I was doing the review through the summer. It was quite a few years ago. So anyhow, okay. And then my Targhee, so that's sort of why these two ratios were so different. Why one was spun on 27-1 and one was spun on 15-1. And this was spun on my Lendrum, because I really love my Lendrum for spinning the long wools. I don't know why. Me and the Lendrum and long wools are like, I don't know. We're like apple pie and ice cream. We're just very perfectly matched. And then for my Targhee, I had actually, so this was the Superwash Targhee. I had just gotten the Ashford E-spinner from Ashford. And so I actually spun this on Ashford, and I spun it on the Ashford, on the E-spinner. And I actually spun it at 2 o'clock. So for those who are unfamiliar with how E-spinners work, I actually just finished the first bobbin of my project for that I'm working on. So this is the first bobbin of 3. It's going to be a 3-ply. So I've got some fiber that I'm going to spin to sort of bridge to the next set of singles, and then I will do the third, and then I'll wind them off onto weaving bobbins and ply from there. So for those who aren't familiar with how e-spinners work, and this is the same for like the Handspun, the little electric eel wheel, all of these electric wheels. When you're talking about speed, of course, these don't have ratios, right? So you don't have a whirl that you're putting with your bobbin. You've just got the bobbin and the flyer, and the motor at the back is it becomes sort of your whirl, if you will, or your ratio. So your revolutions per minute is sort of what you're paying attention to. Now, the thing with e-spinners is you really need to be very consistent in how you spin. So for me, what I'll do, this is your speed knob, whether you're spinning S or spinning Z over here, it doesn't matter which way you're going. Your speed knob is, down here is slower and up here is faster. And what I do is I treat this like a clock. So speed is literally 12 o'clock. Directly this way is my 3 o'clock. And over here is my 9 o'clock. So what I will do is wherever I put the speed and wherever I sort of set it up to spin the singles or to ply, I'll make a note of where the speed was. And that is sort of my way of keeping track of sort of how quickly or how slowly I'm spinning. This has a top speed of 1,200 revolutions, I think, per minute. I think some of the you guys in the chat would probably know this, but like I think like the Handspun there's one that's like a top speed of 1,600 or 2,200. This and the original Handspun I think was a top speed of 1,200. Anyways, it's more than enough for me. It's very fast. You would probably, if you wanted to go any faster, I think you would want this to be smaller. So like the lace bobbin and flyer that the Handspun comes with, when you're spinning that fast and you're spinning that fine. But for me, this is just perfect for my needs and wants. And of course, this is so easy and portable. I do need to get a battery. That is one thing. I said to Mike the other day, I have to get a battery. Because having to plug it in all the time is actually really annoying. Just because of how our house is set up. We actually don't have a lot of power plugs. Isn't that weird? Our house was built almost 40 years ago, and it's not like a super old house, but it's just not got a lot of plugs. Anyways, of all the random things. So that's what I do is I make a note of the speed. So I spun these at the Targhee. I spun it at 2 o'clock, and actually this is a Targhee bamboo silk blend. It's one of Katrina's colorways, Fractured Dawn, which a lot of you will recognize from our fin study. And I'm actually spinning it at 2 o'clock as well because I really like the yarn that it is creating. So more on that next show, because I'm actually hoping that I have the other fiber from Katrina. There's 4 braids that I'm spinning for this project in total. This is the first one. And then the second one is her colorway Pasuta. And I'm also going to do Arctic Berries, which you guys will also remember from the fin study. And I think the other one is Pacific Blue. It's a it's an analogous. It's a semi-solid. So that was the yarns. And then the plied yarns were very different from one another. But the funny thing is, because it's the same colorway, again, like they look like they work together. So this is the unwashed Targhee plied yarn at the bottom, the halo of the Gotland, again unwashed, and then the alpaca merino silk at the top. Look at how smooth that is, and you can see that little chunk of silk that ended up in there. It adds that texture. Normally I would have pulled that out, but I kind of wanted to keep it to remind myself of what it sort of looks like. So those are sort of the unwashed yarns. So if I put this back onto the full camera so that you guys can see the actual colors of this. These are the 3 finished yarns. Aren't they gorgeous? And it's funny because they look like they coordinate and they look like they're the same colors, but the dyes were completely taken up differently by the three. And you can see compared to the webcam, because the colors are off today, you can really see how the what was I going to say? There was something I was going to say about basically the acid dyes, just how they dye the different fibers so differently that results in such a different intensity of color. This was gray originally and they put the dye over top, and the Gotland has ended up in such a very moody yarn. I sort of think of like dark winter, warm. And then the Targhee is much brighter. It's got that kind of spongy effect. It's very springy. It's not dense yarn like this. This is a little bit drapier, a little bit heavier. And then this is sort of this really pretty spring-like, You know, you could have called this spring bouquet and it would have worked. Much lighter, the alpaca, and it just doesn't take the color in the same way. And while there's a lot of color twisting in this one and a lot of barber pulling, because these are all traditional 3-plies, traditional 2-plies. They were all spun exactly the same way. They're all the same weight and gauge, but the grist of all of them is different because the fibers are different. So Gotland is much heavier than the merino alpaca silk. And then the Targhee kind of in the middle. And you can see that in the differences in the skein. Like, look at how fine this skein is. Even though, I wonder if you guys know, which one do you think is the most yardage? Let's see what you guys think. Which one do you think has the most yardage? So even though they're all traditional 2-plies, they're the same weight and gauge, they're very, very different in terms of how the colors worked up. I'd love to hear from you guys too. Which one is your favorite? Which one do you guys like the best? So you guys are all saying Targhee for the yardage, and you're absolutely right. Yeah, the Targhee had the most yardage, and actually by a significant amount, even though it was spun the same way. And I think part of that, so I spun all of these with a short backward draft. So pinch, pull back, pinch, pull back. And I was smoothing as I went back to my fiber supply. I had a question from somebody, and I cannot find it to save my life. I don't know if it was on YouTube or I know it wasn't in Patreon because I've looked and looked and looked. I don't know if it was an email or if it was a comment on the blog, but honestly, I've looked everywhere and I can't find it anywhere. So, and I can't remember who it was that asked the question, but the question was whether or not the forward hand is your drafting hand and the back hand is your fiber supply, or vice versa. So this person had said that she considered her her back hand, her drafting hand. Your forward hand is always your drafting hand. The hand that is closer to the orifice of the wheel is your drafting hand. So even if you're drafting short forward, that makes sense, right? This back hand is holding your fiber and your forward hand is drafting forward, right? That makes sense. This hand at the front for short backward, where you're pinch, pull back, smooth, and continue to pinch, pull back, smooth. This is still your drafting hand, mostly just to keep the language clear, because this is still the hand at the back that's holding your fiber. So even in long backwards draw, this is still the fiber supply hand. And one of the things that I sort of will think about when I'm spinning some of these yarns, and I very much was thinking this with these yarns, all of these yarns, was that this back hand, while yes, it's your fiber supply hand, and I don't have a little bit of fiber here that I can share, I can tell you, you want to try to keep this back grip and this back hand very light, like it's really just guiding and directing. So even if you're doing a short backward or you're doing a short forward, this backhand, light, gentle grip. You don't want to be clutching your fiber and drafting against that, because you're going to draft an inconsistent yarn. So you're going to kind of have this like jerky kind of, when you learned how to drive standard, for those of you who know how to drive a manual vehicle, and you're like kind of jerking around because you're not really letting the clutch out smoothly and you're not on the gas smoothly, and like the whole thing is just jerk, jerk, jerk. Think about, that's kind of what ends up being created, because you're just jerking forward against this grip that you've got at the back. The lighter and gentler that you can hold that back fiber, the more easily you're able to draft forward and create that smooth transition, whether you're drafting forward or backwards or otherwise. I have to rewind this in the right direction because I want to make sure that I start with the same end each time, so that I can keep this fiber consistent. So does that make sense? That's right. So Rebecca says Targhee gives so much bounce for so little density. Silk, alpaca, and Gotland are all more dense just in fiber themselves. So I had a really interesting comment way back, quite a few years ago when I was teaching a beginning spinning class, and I had quite a few students in the class. I think it was a class of 8, and it wasn't Greta's class, because Greta's actually in the chat today, because Greta's a good friend of mine. We've known each other for a really long time. I'll answer your question in a second, Diane, about how did I handle the silk one. This person asked, so it was one of the other classes that I taught. She said, when I was teaching at Sweet Georgia, part of the course fees was that you got a 4-ounce braid to play with throughout the length of the course. So you could pick out what you wanted in one of the first classes. A lot of people didn't pick at their first class. They usually picked by their second or third class. And they would take these 4-ounce braids home, and they could play with it throughout the duration of the course. And we could talk about what they were doing. And, the idea was that by the end of the course, they would sort of have a finished 4-ounce skein of fiber, roughly 113, 115 grams. And I had this one person say to me once that she really was sorry that she had chosen BFL for her fiber. Because for many people coming to spinning, and I'm sure all of you guys remember this from when you were learning, the whole idea that there's all these different breeds out there and there's all these different fibers, wool and the camelids and the plant-based fibers. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And all of a sudden you're sort of like, holy smokes, like this is all in my knitting yarn that I've been knitting with for all these years. And she said to me that she was really sorry that she had chosen BFL. And I was like, oh, why? Like, you've made this beautiful yarn. Like, why? And she's like, well, because in spinning the samples for the course, she's like, I get so much yardage with the Polworth and she lists off a couple of the other fibers, because that was right about the time that Targhee was becoming really popular and was sort of starting to come onto the radar of a lot of spinners. It wasn't popular then like it is now. It was sort of Merino or Polworth and then and BFL. Like that was kind of what was really, really, really readily available. Because it's just so much more dense. And it was sort of an interesting comment, because I sort of stood there and thought, yeah, like you're just not going to you can eke out tons of yardage from the long wools. You need to spin them a little bit finer, but they are just generally slightly denser yarns. And for most of us, the difference and the discrepancy is very little. And it's not enough to sort of worry about or think about, but you are going to be able to get a lot more yardage from some of these finer wools than you will from some of the long wools. That's not to say that this was not there's not a ton of yardage here, because there is. There's still a lot of yardage in this skein as well. Now with the merino alpaca silk, I treated it exactly the same way. So I spun short backward, smoothing the fibers as I went. And I had divided all of these braids in half lengthwise so that I had 2 equal length sets of fiber. And then from there, I divided each of them into 4 and spun them. So the Gotland was a little bit different because I was playing around with the distaff, which we'll be talking about more sort of later in the year. But the other 2, I basically made 4 nests, stripped the fiber lengthwise 4 times, 2 sets of 4, spun them end to end, keeping the color repeat in the same order. So that was this one. And it spun like a dream. It was so easy peasy. I did pre-draft a little bit, not a ton. And it made just a really, really pleasing yarn. I was surprised by this one. Of the 3, this was the one that I was the least excited about, and this ended up being tied for first place in terms of the one that I liked the best. And spoiler alert, I like them all equally. So it's tied for first place with the Targhee and the Gotland. So I don't think I'd be able to pick which one I would wanna, that I like the absolute best. I like them all for different reasons. Yeah. Oh, okay. So Suzanne has a question. I have always started and finished a spin on the same wheel, figuring I needed to so that it was consistent. Is that just me? I think a lot of spinners do that, Suzanne. And of course, some people do that because they only have one wheel. But I don't worry about it. Like if I finished bobbins on like my Magicraft, and I need to throw another to figure out which tool I want, I need to use, I will, if I finish the bobbins, and particularly on the Lendrum, if I finish up the bobbins, I'll often ply on my Magikarcraft just because I prefer plying on my Magikarcraft. My ratios on my Magikarcraft are higher, so I can get plying faster. I plied this on the e-spinner, and that went really super fast. And I cranked up the speed to like 3 o'clock, and away you go. So yeah, you don't have to use the same wheel. You don't have to use the same tools. There's a lot of spindle spinners out there. I'm thinking of Threadbender, for example, on Instagram. She's local to me. She does all of her spinning on her spindles, and she plies everything on her wheel. So there's no right answer by any stretch. I think the big thing, to be honest with you, is making a note of what it is that you've done. I think that's the most important thing. Like if you want to recreate that yarn, or you're making a high volume of yarn, what is it that you did so that you can recreate it if you're making multiple yarns for one project? That was part of the reason why I was so meticulous about making notes for this project, partially because I'm going to be teaching this in the School of Sweet Georgia, but also because I wanted to be able to recreate it 3 times on 3 different fibers and then evaluate my results and my differences. Which is the shortest in yardage? Great question, Jill. I think it's the Gotland. I just dropped the alpaca. Let me see if I can grab it. I think it's the Gotland, but to be honest with you, it might be the alpaca. I think it's the Gotland though. Just looking at it, I would say Gotland. But there, yeah, I'm pretty sure it's the Gotland. I will report back. All right. I'm just making sure that I didn't miss any questions. So I'm just going to take a pause because we're coming up on an hour. And I'm always just really, really aware of you guys and your time, because I so appreciate you guys being here and taking the time out of your day, but I also don't want to keep you here for like eons. Yeah, great question, San. So will the Gotland give more drape like the alpaca, and hence maybe not the best use for a sweater? I'm going to do some sampling. So I'm going to knit some do some knitted samples from all 3 of these. I'm also going to do some woven samples. And then Felicia and I are going to get together and decide what we're going to do, whether we're going to put together a weaving class on weaving with color in Handspun. It'd be sort of like a mini course, or if we're going to do a knitting course, spin to knit, kind of a, yarn substitution kind of course. So we're sort of trying to develop those ideas and figure that out. That's a great point, actually, Meg. If you want structure with the long wool, she tends to knit a textured pattern to give it structure. Yeah, and the other thing I was thinking too was if you put the Gotland in a sweater, if you put it sort of towards the bottom, like the Comfort Fade Cardi, it would be okay to have some of that drape at the bottom, because it's sort of the body of the sweater, as long as you don't knit it too long where it's going to like really pull out. But it would create quite a different texture than the other yarns. So I'm kind of thinking about some of that. Hence, needing to sample. So I'm hoping that I'll have those done for next week, but we will see. I'm working tonight, so I'm hoping that maybe if I get them wound into skeins and get the yardage counted, that maybe I will be able to do that. So I wanted to share this with you really quickly. I pulled out my Shifty sweater because I had mentioned last show that I didn't have enough yardage. Do you guys want me to show this on the other camera? Is this too blue? You remember this shawl that I did that was that I did in the summer with some Dorset yarn that was the Spunky Eclectic. I'd spun it in 2014 and never done anything with it. And then I knit up the shawl in the summer. If you guys want, actually, I'll just pop in a photo so that you remember it, because I know some of you are new to this space and maybe haven't seen all of the back episodes, or maybe haven't seen some of my projects on my project page, because I know, like, I don't know about you guys, but I find there's just such a huge amount of stuff out there, like in terms of posts on Instagram and projects that friends are posting, as well as projects that you guys all post, it's all like, it's a lot of stuff. So it was this project here. So let me make it a bit smaller. Resize, resize. You guys are probably remembering this now that you're seeing it. It was this project here. Still one of my most favorite things that I've ever made, to be honest with you. I know that might sound crazy, but this is, honest to goodness, one of my most favorite shawls that I've ever made. It was based on, why is this doing that? Move down. It was one of my most favorite projects that I've ever made. And this was when we were doing our Dorset horn project. And I was trying to figure out how to use this yarn and all of the yarns that I had made for the Dorset study all together in one big project. And the reality was, I just couldn't make it all work. I didn't like the results that I was coming up with. This yarn had been spun so long ago with a different wheel, a different technique. It was very thick and thin. It was really one of the very first yarns that I made from a 4-ounce braid of comb top. And my first experience with sort of this down prep that was sort of, a little bit, spin a little bit of, kind of worstedy, a little bit of long draw, like trying to yarn that I just fell in love with, but didn't really have enough yardage to make socks with. It was too fine. So using it with the Dorset horn study, I had sort of thought, oh yeah, like I'll, put it all together and I'll use it and I'll be able to feature it and blah, 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 blah. And everything I tried just didn't work. And so I ended up playing around with this shawl pattern that I had designed for another yarn that's just like a garter and stockinette sort of idea. So it's, 3 rows of stockinette and then 2 ridges of garter and so on. So you can see it right there where that sort of mint color is, that with the purple. So what I did with this to make it a little bit more interesting was every other stockinette section, I added 4 rows instead of 3 of so to make it a little tiny bit longer. And I did knit 2 together, yarn over, knit 2 together, yarn over. And the information is actually on the blog. It's a free pattern and I just modified it that way. So what I decided to do with this yarn was to do that same thing again, because I have enough to do a shawl that's very similar in size to this one. This yarn is very green. It's got some reds in there. There's the purple. This is my combo drafted yarn from the Fin study. And it's all colors that I wear all the time. You can see I'm wearing the bluey green right now. And it'll just give me some variety because I wear this so much. It's kind of become a bit of a uniform for me that I thought having another one and just having the choice more than anything would be really great. And it would feature this yarn in the meantime. So I've actually been working on this when I need something really mindless to work on, and I'm really enjoying it. I'm knitting on 4mm needles. No, 3. Oh, I didn't know I was knitting on 3.5s. I meant to knit on 4mm needles. So I probably need to change that because actually this is a little bit too dense, this fabric that's being created. And once it blocks out, it'll block out kind of more like that. So I need to up my needle size, which is totally fine because if I go to a bigger needle size now, I like to knit the beginning of my shawls slightly smaller on smaller needles, because otherwise you know how sometimes you get that like blip at the top of triangular shawls, and it's just because those initial stitches are sort of need to fit in this sort of relatively small area. So I'll often start on smaller needles, and around here I'll increase to slightly bigger needles, but I'll do that now. It's totally fine. I'm not going to rip it out again. So I'm really enjoying this, but I do need to go, I need to go up in needle sizes. I was wondering why it was so dense. I was going to look at that later. So that is my knit in progress right now. And yesterday on the wool stream, I talked quite extensively about the shift cowl that I'm making. So we'll talk about that a little bit more next week because we're sort of at the end of our show. There is a special offer going on right now on Patreon for certain tiers for the How I Spin a Sock Study ebook. And if you are interested in a soft cover copy of the book, there are links in the show notes that you can purchase directly from Blurb. Yeah. Yeah, it totally handles the weight better. Yeah. Diane says, made a thick and thin, inconsistent, various fibers, salad bar yarn. Oh, I love that idea, the salad bar yarn. And it turned out perfectly all knit up. It's funny because I can't remember who it was. I'm really sorry. The Slack channel is so busy that sometimes I just can't keep up with who's posting stuff, but I do read everything and I do see everything. I think it was Rebecca, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. She had posted about having spun and knit a sweater recently, and she had said that the yarn wasn't as consistent as she had hoped to. But, you know, when you look at the knitted fabric and when you look at her finished sweater, you can't tell. Like, this yarn was incredibly thick and thin in the shawl that's still cycling. I didn't turn it off. Sorry, guys. You can't tell. Like, it's just incredible how forgiving our knitting is. And if it wasn't such a yarn hog, crochet is the same way. I just don't crochet because it uses up too much yarn. Oh, I will show you before we say goodbye. I am knitting from my tweed study. I am making, I did decide to ball up the yarn, and actually I might take this to work tonight because I really need to work on it. So it would kind of make me work on it. I'm really liking the yarn. This is my tweed from our 51 yarn spin along. I balled up the yarn. Let me switch the cameras, hang on. I balled up the yarn and I don't really know what my yardage ended up being. I didn't bother to count it. This was like a one-off. I don't have any more of this fiber. I'm not going to make it again. But I did cast on for a toque for my sister-in-law. So it was her birthday in February. She's having a really, really tough time. There's a lot of stuff going on in her family. And I've been thinking about her a lot. And she had asked me for a new toque for next year. And these are her colors, and she has a black winter coat. And so I decided, and this is her absolute most favorite color. Even their dishes are this color. So I decided to do a toque for her. So this is, I can't remember what the pattern is called. I'll tell you guys really quickly, and then we'll say goodbye. I think I put it in my projects. Maybe I didn't. Let me just find it really quick. It's a free pattern. And it is, it's a toque. Oh, the Hourglass Winter Toque by Cecile Clark. Hourglass, one word, Hourglass Winter Hat by Cecily. Sorry, I read her name wrong. Cecily Clark. And basically these slipped stitches will be lifted up and it creates an hourglass pattern up the toque, and then it's decreased at the top with some garter stitch rows, and you attach a pom-pom. It's really cute. So, and I did already get her pom-pom for her. Fabricana had a big sale, and so the everything was 50% off. So this ended up costing me $7. This will go on top. Super cute. Wham bam. Thank you, ma'am. And hers and Mai's favorite author and our favorite books. She did an English degree, and which is kind of funny because she's ended up working in finance. But her and I absolutely love Jane Austen. And so I found this at a local bookshop. I used to work at this little bookstore cafe. And so I go in there every so often because she always brings in really cool stuff. Anyways, what would Jane do? So there's some really fun stuff in here. He is a gentleman and I am a gentleman's daughter. So far we are equal. That's from Pride and Prejudice. Better be without sense then misapply it as you do. Emma, 1815. I cannot speak well enough to be unintelligible. Anyways, it's all these like quotes. So I know Katie will really appreciate it. And I'm going to put that together for her. So I thought I would share that really quickly. I don't do a lot of gift knitting. The only people I really gift knit for is my brother, my sister-in-law, my niece and nephew, the kids, and my mom once in a while. My mom makes her own stuff, so I don't tend to make a lot of stuff for my mom. I'll give her yarn, and I'll give her like needles and crochet hooks and stuff, and then she tends to make her own stuff. I've done a couple of things for my mother-in-law. I don't know if she wears them. Same with my sister-in-law. Yeah, it's mostly my brother's family because they really appreciate it and they really wear the stuff. So that's like the true testimony, right? Are you knit worthy? Do you wear the stuff or do you never see it again? So especially when it's hand spun, because my brother's family and my sister-in-law, my niece and nephew are definitely hand spun worthy. So there you go. All right, you guys, it's so good to chat. I could sit here all day. I know that many of you could as well. I really appreciate you being here. And thank you so, so much for your time and your enthusiasm and your support. Please head over to patreon.com/wowforpearls if you're interested in learning more about the virtual spinning group, particularly if you don't have any access to anything like that locally. I know this has been a call from the community for a number of years, and we're going to start off with sort of 30 minutes at a time and see how that goes, with the intention to eventually increase to an hour. So if that is something that you're interested in and would like to support and would like to see longer spin groups, please let me know what times and days work for you, because I sort of thought that we would have 2 or 3 a month. We've got 3 going right now per month in that tier, and we'll just see how it goes. Maybe it'll work better to do 2 per month but do them an hour in length, or maybe it'll work better to do 3 per month and a little bit shorter. Maybe this is something you guys want weekly. Just feedback. I want feedback. Let me know what you think. And until next time, happy spinning, happy knitting. Have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. It's sunny here, and I'll be heading into work tonight. So I'll be thinking about all of you, making all of your lovely things today and tomorrow. And I will chat with you next week. Bye, guys.